I stared at the thick, cream-colored envelope resting on my kitchen counter. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind of cardstock that smelled like old money and new arrogance. My name, Isabella Vance, was written across the front in a sweeping, pretentious calligraphy that tried far too hard to look aristocratic. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I had seen the save the dates plastered all over my mutual friends' Instagram stories for the past 6 months. It was the wedding invitation for Mark, my ex-boyfriend of 5 years, and his new fiancée, Chloe, but it wasn't just an invitation. When I slid my silver letter opener under the wax seal and pulled out the embossed card, a smaller handwritten note fluttered out and landed face up on the marble island. The handwriting was sharp and spidery. Chloe's handwriting. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the perfectly looped ink. Isabella, Mark and I discussed it, and we both agreed it is only right to invite you given your history. We want no bad blood. However, as a gentle request, please try to wear something loose and flowing. The venue is a historic estate, and the antique chairs in the reception hall are quite fragile and narrow. Hate for you to feel uncomfortable, or worse, cause a scene by breaking one. See you there. Warmly, Chloe. I read it twice, then a third time. The audacity was so profound, so suffocatingly cruel, that for a moment the air left my lungs. It wasn't just a passive-aggressive jab. It was a calculated, venomous strike aimed directly at the deepest, most agonizing insecurity Mark had spent 5 years carving into my soul. My size. I am a size 20. I have always been curvy. I have wide hips, thick thighs, a full chest, and a soft stomach. For my entire life, I have been told by society that my body was a before picture waiting to be fixed. But nobody drove that knife deeper than the man who had just invited me to watch him marry a size 0 fitness instructor. They expected me to cry. They expected me to RSVP with a polite, humiliated decline, proving that I was still the broken, insecure, fat girl they had left behind. They wanted the psychological victory of knowing they had crushed me one final time. But what Mark and Chloe didn't know was that the woman reading that note wasn't the trembling, desperate girl Mark had dumped a year ago. She was dead. The woman standing in this kitchen was the newly appointed global creative director of Vanguard Luxuries. And I didn't just plan on attending their little countryside wedding. I planned on burning their entire world to the ground. To understand the sheer magnitude of this insult, you have to understand who Mark was and who I was when I loved him. We met in our mid-20s. At the time, I was a junior graphic designer hustling 70 hours a week, and Mark was an entry-level financial analyst drowning in student debt. He was charming, handsome in a safe corporate way, but deeply, deeply insecure. He drove a rusted Honda, wore cheap suits that didn't fit him right, and constantly complained about how the world wasn't handing him the success he felt he deserved. I became his anchor. When he couldn't afford rent, I moved him into my apartment and paid the lion's share of the bills. When he needed a tailored suit for a crucial interview, I maxed out my credit card to buy him a Tom Ford two-piece. I edited his presentations, cooked his meals, and stroked his fragile ego every time a promotion passed him by. But as Mark climbed the corporate ladder standing on my shoulders to do so, his attitude towards me began to curdle. As he started rubbing elbows with wealthier, higher-status colleagues, he became hyper-fixated on appearances, and my size 20 body suddenly became a liability in his eyes. It started with small, insidious comments disguised as concern. "Bella, babe, are you sure you want to eat that? Carbs are a killer. I just want you to be healthy, you know. Your face is so gorgeous, if you just dropped 50 pounds, you'd be a supermodel." Then the comments turned into actions. He stopped holding my hand in public. When his company hosted their annual gala, he told me it was employees only, only for me to see photos online the next day showing every other executive with their wives and girlfriends. When I confronted him, the mask slipped. "Look, Isabella," he had sighed, rubbing his temples like I was a stubborn child. "You have to understand the optics. The partners at my firm, their wives are all Pilates instructors and former models. You're a beautiful girl, but you don't fit the aesthetic. You don't take care of yourself. I can't have my boss looking at you and wondering why a senior vice president is with a woman who lacks the discipline to put down a donut." The words had hit me like physical blows. I was working 12-hour days building my own career, paying half his rent, and loving him with everything I had, and to him I was nothing but an embarrassing, undisciplined fat girl who ruined his aesthetic. Instead of leaving him, like any self-respecting woman should have, I internalized it. I believed him. I hated my body. I wore oversized dark clothing to hide my curves. I shrunk myself, trying to take up as little space as possible in his life, hoping that if I was quiet enough, helpful enough, useful enough, He would finally love me. The final betrayal came the night he secured the promotion to executive vice president, a promotion that happened solely because I had spent 3 sleepless nights designing the massive pitch deck that won his firm a $50 million account. He came home late. He smelled like expensive gin and someone else's gardenia perfume. I had prepared a celebratory dinner, lighting candles, wearing a new dress I had bought just for the occasion. He walked into the dining room, looked at the food, looked at me, and said the words that would alter the trajectory of my life forever. "I'm moving out, Isabella." I had frozen, the serving spoon trembling in my hand. "What? Mark, you just got the VP spot. We have so much to celebrate." He wouldn't even look me in the eye. "I met someone else. Her name is Chloe. She's different. She runs marathons, she eats clean, she fits the life I'm moving into. I'm sorry, Bella, but you and I are going in different directions. I need a woman who can stand beside me at the top, not someone I have to hide." He packed his bags that night. 3 weeks later, they were Instagram official. Chloe was a walking cliché, a size 0 fitness influencer with bleach blonde extensions, fake lips, and a bio that read "good vibes and green juice." She made sure to tag him in every post, showing off her impossibly flat stomach and his new wealth. The wealth I had helped build. The first few months after the breakup, I was a ghost. I existed on a diet of black coffee and sheer grief, but somewhere in that darkness the grief began to ferment. It boiled, bubbled, and slowly crystallized into something cold, sharp, and infinitely more powerful. Absolute, unapologetic rage. I didn't try to lose weight to spite him. That would have been playing his game. Instead, I decided to weaponize the very body he had deemed unacceptable. If he thought my size meant I was unworthy of respect, I was going to force the entire world to bow down to my curves. I poured every ounce of my manic, vengeful energy into my career. I stopped hiding. I fired my old wardrobe of baggy black sweaters and hired a luxury plus-size stylist. I started wearing structured, tailored blazers that cinched my waist, wide-leg trousers that accentuated my thick thighs, and bold, unapologetic colors. I wore red lipstick to morning meetings. I walked into boardrooms like I owned the building, and the crazy thing was, the world responded. Confidence is an intoxicating drug, and I was suddenly radiating it. Within 6 months, my brutal work ethic and aggressive new aesthetic caught the eye of Vanguard Luxuries, one of the most prestigious fashion and lifestyle conglomerates in the world. They poached me, offering me the role of global creative director, a salary that tripled Mark's, and an expense account that would make his corporate partners weep. My life became a blur of first-class flights to Milan, private dinners with fashion icons, and an income bracket Mark could only dream of. I was making more money in a month than he made in a year, and I did it all at a size 20. But the universe, in its infinite, twisted sense of humor, wasn't done giving me gifts. 3 months before the wedding invitation arrived, Vanguard Luxuries had acquired a massive private equity firm. The transition was highly confidential, handled at the uppermost echelon of the board. As a senior executive, I was brought into a closed-door meeting to discuss the rebranding of this newly acquired asset. The CEO of Vanguard, a terrifyingly brilliant, ridiculously wealthy, and devastatingly handsome man named Alexander Pierce, projected the org chart of the acquired firm onto the boardroom screen. "This is the current executive structure of our new subsidiary," Alexander had said, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the silence. "We will be gutting the middle management and evaluating the VPs. Most of them are deadweight, entitled, arrogant, and underperforming." I had looked up at the screen, my eyes scanning the names. My heart stopped. There, under the title of Executive Vice President of Regional Sales, was a face I knew intimately. Mark, my Mark, the man who had dumped me for being too fat for his corporate aesthetic, the man who was so proud of his status. His company had just been quietly bought out by my company. He didn't know it yet. The public announcement wasn't scheduled until the end of the fiscal year. He had no idea that the woman he had discarded like trash was now sitting at a table with the men who held his entire career, his salary, and his future in the palm of their hands. And now, staring at this disgustingly cruel wedding invitation from his new, perfect bride, a slow, wicked smile spread across my face. They wanted me to wear something loose. They wanted me to blend in, to hide, to be the pathetic, fat ex-girlfriend crying in the back row. I am going to give them a wedding present they will never, ever forget, I thought, my fingers tracing the edge of Chloe's note. I am going to show up to this wedding, and I am going to bring the god of death with me. The next morning, I walked into the Vanguard Luxuries headquarters in Manhattan. I wasn't wearing loose clothing. I was wearing a tailored emerald green pencil skirt that hugged every inch of my wide hips, paired with a sharp white silk blouse and Christian Louboutin stilettos. The click-clack of my heels echoed off the Italian marble floors as I made my way to the executive suite. I had a meeting with Alexander Pierce to review the rebranding strategy for Marquet's company. Alexander was a man who commanded a room without raising his voice. Standing at 6'4" with piercing slate-gray eyes, sharp jawline, and the kind of broad, muscular build that made bespoke Tom Ford suits look like armor, he was intimidating to most. But over the last few months, we had developed a mutual, fierce professional respect. He didn't care about the corporate aesthetic of his employees. He cared about results, brilliance, and loyalty. And he had made it very clear that he found my unapologetic confidence incredibly attractive. We sat in his corner office, going over the Q3 projections. As we reviewed the personnel files of the newly acquired firm, Alexander tapped his gold Mont Blanc pen against Marquez's photo on the screen. "This one," Alexander said, his voice dropping an octave, thick with disdain. "Mark Evans, EVP of Sales. His numbers are stagnant. He spends more time managing his golf club memberships and his influencer fiancé than he does closing accounts. He's exactly the kind of dead weight I want to cut." I looked at Marquez's smug, corporate headshot. A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Alexander paused, his sharp eyes locking onto mine. "You know him." It wasn't a question. I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my legs. There was no point in lying to a man like Alexander. "I do. We dated for 5 years. I paid his rent, bought his first suit, and designed the pitch deck that got him that EVP title. Then he dumped me for the influencer fiancé because my size 20 body didn't fit his new, wealthy aesthetic." Alexander's expression didn't change, but the air in the room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. His jaw tightened, a dangerous muscle ticking in his cheek. He looked at me, really looked at me, his gaze slowly dragging down my curves, lingering on my hips before meeting my eyes again. There was a raw, undeniable hunger in his stare that made my breath catch. "He thought you were a liability?" Alexander asked, his voice dangerously soft. "The man is not just incompetent. He is blind." I reached into my Prada tote and pulled out the cream-colored invitation, tossing it onto the mahogany desk. He also invited me to his wedding next weekend. His new fiancé included a handwritten note asking me to wear something loose so I wouldn't break the antique chairs with my weight. Alexander picked up the note. I watched his eyes scan the delicate handwriting. When he finished, he didn't laugh. He didn't offer me pity. He slowly placed the note back on the desk, leaned forward, and steepled his fingers. "Isabella," he said, the authority in his voice vibrating through the desk. "You are the global creative director of a $50 billion luxury empire. You are the most striking, captivating woman in this building. You are not going to this wedding to blend in. You are not going to wear something loose." He stood up, walking around the desk until he was standing right in front of me. He was so close I could smell his Kelowna sandalwood and expensive scotch. "You are going to walk into that reception," he murmured, his thumb gently grazing my jawline, "and you are going to eclipse every single person in that room, and you are not going alone." I looked up at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You want to be my +1, Alexander? He's your employee? Technically, you're his boss?" A slow, predatory, wolfish grin spread across Alexander's face. "Exactly. He worships status. He worships money, and I am the man who signs his paychecks. I want a front row seat when he realizes the fat girl he discarded is now untouchable. If you are going to execute a flawless high society revenge, you do not buy a dress off the rack, you buy armor." With Alexander's backing, I called in a massive favor from Frenois, one of Vanguard's top Parisian haute couture designers. Frenois was a legend in the fashion industry, known for refusing to dress anyone who wasn't royalty or A-list Hollywood. But I was his creative director, and more importantly, I was his muse. I flew to Paris for a weekend on the company jet. When I walked into Frenois' atelier, I told him exactly what I needed. "I am going to my ex-boyfriend's wedding," I told him in fluent French, dropping my coat onto a velvet sofa. "His new wife is a size 0 who told me to wear a tent so I don't break the furniture. I need a dress that doesn't just show off my size 20 body. I need a dress that weaponizes it. I want a dress that makes men drop to their knees and makes insecure women want to claw their own eyes out." Frenois laughed, a rich, booming sound, and immediately started sketching. "Ma chérie," he purred, "we will not hide your curves. We will worship them. We will build a shrine to them." The creation process was grueling. 3 fittings over 4 days. The final masterpiece was nothing short of lethal. It was a custom, floor-length couture gown made from liquid, heavy silk in a deep, blood ruby red. The color was aggressive, demanding, and impossible to ignore. It featured a hidden, internal corset, built with actual steel boning that violently cinched my waist. pushing up my breasts into a plunging sweetheart neckline that was borderline scandalous but undeniably high fashion. The skirt draped perfectly over my wide hips and thick thighs, clinging to every curve before flowing into a dramatic, sweeping train. The dress featured a thigh-high slit that revealed my leg with every step, and off-the-shoulder straps that left my collarbones completely bare. It wasn't a dress meant to minimize my size. It was a dress that magnified my power. I looked like a curvy, voluptuous goddess of war. The price tag was $150,000. When I pulled out my black card to pay for it, Francois shook his head and handed me a receipt that had already been settled. Monsieur Pierce took care of it. Francois winked. He said it was a necessary company expense for public relations. I stared at the receipt, a hot flush spreading across my chest. Alexander wasn't just playing along, he was orchestrating a massacre. When I returned to New York, I spent the morning of the wedding getting ready in my penthouse. A professional glam squad, usually reserved for Vanguard's celebrity campaigns, spent 3 hours perfecting my look. My dark hair was styled into massive, cascading Hollywood waves that tumbled over one shoulder. My makeup was flawless, sharp, dramatic contouring that highlighted my cheekbones, a subtle, smoky eye, and a matte lipstick in the exact same shade of blood ruby as my gown. I slipped into the dress. As the assistants laced the internal corset tight, I looked at myself in the floor-to-length mirror. For 5 years, Mark had made me feel like a grotesque, undesirable monster. He had made me apologize for the space I took up. He had made me believe that beauty was a strict mathematical equation that stopped at a size 4. But the woman looking back at me in the mirror wasn't apologizing for anything. She was a powerhouse. She was thick. She was heavy. She was curvy. And she was devastatingly, undeniably gorgeous. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Alexander. I'm downstairs. The wedding was taking place at the Oakfield Country Club, a notoriously snobby, old-money estate in upstate New York. It was exactly the kind of pretentious, beige, lifeless venue Mark and Chloe thought equated to high society. As we drove up the winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees, I could see the other guests arriving. They were exactly as I expected. Men in rented, ill-fitting tuxedos, and women in safe pastel chiffon dresses, all desperately trying to look wealthier than they were. I was sitting in the back of Alexandera's matte black, chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce Phantom. The car alone was worth more than the entire wedding budget. Alexander sat beside me, dressed in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo with a black silk lapel. He looked like James Bond's far more dangerous, richer older brother. When he looked at me, his eyes darkened, traveling over the ruby-red silk clinging to my curves. "You look like a weapon, Isabella," he said, his voice low and raspy. He reached out, his large, warm hand covering mine, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "Are you ready to ruin his life?" I smiled, a slow, venomous curve of my red lips. I'm ready to show him exactly what he threw away. The Rolls-Royce pulled up to the main entrance of the country club, sliding smoothly to a halt right behind a line of basic Mercedes and BMWs. The valet, a young kid in a uniform, rushed forward, his eyes widening at the sight of the Phantom. A crowd of guests was lingering by the entrance, smoking cigars and sipping cheap champagne. I recognized several faces: Mark's old college buddies, his junior sales team, and his obnoxious, hypercritical mother who used to pinch my waist and tell me to lay off the bread. They were all chatting and laughing until the chauffeur opened the heavy door of the Rolls-Royce. Alexander stepped out first. His sheer size, combined with the brutal aura of billionaire authority he radiated, made the crowd instantly fall silent. People literally stopped mid-sentence, staring at the titan of industry who had just graced this mediocre wedding. Then Alexander turned. He offered his hand into the dark interior of the car. I placed my hand in his, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the fading sunlight. The moment the heel of my Louboutin hit the pavement, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just a physical change, it was a visceral, suffocating silence that slammed into the crowd. I stepped out of the Phantom, pulling myself up to my full height. The heavy ruby-red silk of my gown cascaded around my thick thighs, the thigh-high slit exposing a flash of flawless leg. The steel-boned corset pushed my chest up, cinching my waist so aggressively that my curves looked almost weaponized. I didn't look like a woman trying to hide. I looked like a woman who owned the ground she walked on. I locked my arm through Alexander's. He stood tall beside me, an immovable wall of bespoke tailoring and terrifying power. We began to walk toward the entrance. The silence shattered into frantic, aggressive whispering. Is that Isabella?" I heard a voice hiss from the left. It was Marka's old frat brother Dave. He was staring at my chest, his jaw practically unhinged. "It can't be. Look at that dress. That's easily 6 figures," another woman muttered. I kept my gaze fixed forward, maintaining a perfectly bored, elevated smirk. As we reached the heavy oak doors of the country club, a woman with a tightly pulled facelift and an ugly pastel pink pantsuit stepped directly into our path. It was Marka's mother, Brenda, the same woman who had once handed me a pamphlet for a gastric bypass surgery as a birthday gift. Brenda's eyes darted wildly from the top of my perfectly styled hair, down the plunging neckline of my custom gown, to the massive diamond watch on Alexandra's wrist. Her face flushed a violent, mottled red. The cheap glass of Prosecco in her hand actually trembled. "Isabella?" Brenda choked out, her voice shrill with disbelief. "What? What are you doing here, and in that outfit?" Before I could even open my mouth, Alexander looked down at her. He didn't blink. He just stared at her with the cold, dead-eyed calculation of a predator assessing a very insignificant bug. "She is my date," Alexander said smoothly, his voice echoing in the quiet foyer, "and she is wearing custom frenevois. I suggest you step aside before you spill that, whatever it is you're drinking, on a dress that costs more than your son's mortgage." Brenda actually gasped, stepping back so fast she nearly tripped over the welcome mat. I didn't look at her. I just tightened my grip on Alexander's arm, and together, we swept into the grand reception hall. The moment we crossed the threshold, the real show began. The reception hall was supposed to be a display of Mark and Chloe's high society aesthetic, but to someone who spent their days directing multi-million-dollar luxury campaigns, the entire room looked aggressively cheap. The floral arrangements were mostly filler greenery, the champagne flutes were thick glass instead of crystal, and the fragile, antique chairs Chloe had warned me about in her cruel little note, they were flimsy, mass-produced wooden rentals from a local party supply store. We stood at the top of the short staircase overlooking the dining floor. There were about 200 guests seated at their tables, waiting for the bride and groom's grand entrance. When they saw us, the murmuring started again. A wave of turning heads swept across the room. I was the brightest, most vibrant thing in a sea of beige and gray. My curves were on full display, proud and defiant. I wasn't just taking up space, I was dominating it. Then the double doors at the far end of the hall swung open. The DJ hit the play button on some generic pop song, and the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, let's welcome Mr. and Mrs. Mark Evans." Mark and Chloe walked into the room, waving, their faces plastered with wide, camera-ready smiles. Mark was wearing a white tuxedo jacket that made his shoulders look narrow, and Chloe was wearing a plain, white, size 0 slip dress. It was supposed to look minimalist and chic, but without the benefit of Instagram filters and extreme lighting, it just looked like a tragic silk nightgown. They made their way to the center of the dance floor for their first dance, waving at their guests, and then Mark looked up towards the top of the stairs. His eyes locked onto me. The smile on his face died instantly. It didn't fade, it was assassinated. His entire body went rigid. He stumbled, stepping directly onto the hem of Chloe's slip dress. Chloe let out a sharp yelp, stumbling forward before catching herself. She glared at Mark, following his line of sight. When her eyes landed on me, the color drained from her perfectly tanned, sculpted face. She had expected the pathetic, fat ex-girlfriend wearing a loose, oversized sack, crying in the corner. Instead, she was staring at a curvy, voluptuous titan in blood ruby silk, standing on the arm of a billionaire who radiated dominance. Standing next to me in my couture, the bride looked invisible. The first dance ended in awkward, stiff silence. Mark and Chloe quickly retreated to the bridal table, but the damage was done. Every single eye in that room wasn't on the bride. They were on me. I walked down the stairs with Alexander, making our way to the seating chart. But before we could even find our names, a flurry of white silk rushed toward us. It was Chloe. Her smile was tight, her eyes wide and panicked. She practically lunged in front of us, blocking our path to the tables. "Isabella?" Chloe chirped, her voice 2 octaves too high. "Wow, you actually came, and you wore that?" She eyed the plunging neckline of my corset, her nose wrinkling in poorly disguised disgust. "It's very loud. Didn't you get my note about wearing something loose? I'm just so worried you're going to be uncomfortable squeezing into these chairs." I smiled, my red lips curving into a terrifyingly calm smile. "Oh, Chloe, I got your note, but my date insisted I wear this. And as for the chairs, don't worry, I'm quite comfortable taking up exactly as much space as I want." Chloe's eyes darted to Alexander. She didn't know who he was, but she could smell the money rolling off him. She puffed out her chest, trying to assert dominance. Well, anyway, I've placed you at table 24. It's in the back, near the kitchen doors. It's a bit more private, so you won't feel so exposed. She was trying to hide me. She wanted me shoved in a dark corner next to the swinging doors of the catering staff, so nobody would have to look at the massive, beautiful woman upstaging the bride. Before I could politely tell her to go to hell, Alexander stepped forward. Table 24 won't be necessary, Alexander said, his voice cold and flat. We will be sitting at table 1, the VIP table. Chloe scoffed, a nasty, patronizing little sound. Excuse me? Table 1 is reserved strictly for Mark's corporate executives and firm partners. It's for VIPs only. You can't just sit there. Suddenly, Mark appeared behind Chloe, out of breath and sweating through his white tuxedo jacket. He grabbed Chloe's arm, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror as he stared at Alexander.
See, Chloe, stop!
Mark stammered, his voice cracking. Mark, tell them! Chloe whined, pulling her arm away. She shows up in this trashy red dress, trying to ruin my day, and now this guy thinks he can sit at the executive table. Mark looked like he was about to vomit. He looked at Alexander, his hands actually shaking. Mr. Pierce, I had no idea you were coming. I didn't. The guest list. Chloe froze. Mr. Pierce? Wait, who is he? Alexander didn't look at Chloe. He kept his slate gray eyes locked onto Mark, letting the silence stretch out until the tension was suffocating. I am Alexander Pierce, he finally said loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, CEO of Vanguard Luxuries, which, as of last month, is the parent company that fully owns your firm, Evans. I sign your paychecks, I dictate your bonuses, and I hold your entire career in the palm of my hand. Chloe's mouth dropped open. She looked from Alexander to Marcus, terrified, sweating face, and then finally to me. The realization hit her like a freight train. So, Alexander continued, taking my arm again, are you telling me I'm sitting at the wrong table, Evans? Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. No, sir, please. Table 1 is. It's yours, right at the front. Excellent, Alexander said. He didn't spare them another glance as he guided me past the bride and groom, straight to the best seat in the house. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Sitting at table 1, right in front of the bridal party, I didn't break a sweat. I ate the mediocre chicken breast, drank the cheap champagne, and laughed at Alexander's dark, witty jokes. Every time Mark looked up from his plate, he saw me. He saw the fat girl he had discarded, the woman he had told was too ugly and undisciplined for his corporate world, sitting next to the billionaire who now owned his corporate world. He couldn't eat. He couldn't smile. He just sat there, sweating, a prisoner at his own wedding. When the time came for the speeches, the air in the room was thick with tension. The best man gave a slurred, unfunny speech, and then it was Mark's turn. Mark stood up, grabbing the microphone with trembling hands. He looked at his new size 0 bride, and then, inexplicably, he looked at me. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was his fragile, desperate ego trying to reclaim some power, but he decided to double down. Thank you all for coming, Mark said, his voice echoing over the speakers. You know, finding Chloe was the best thing that ever happened to me in my past. He paused, his eyes darting to my ruby-red dress. In my past, I settled. I was with people who didn't share my drive, people who didn't have the discipline to take care of themselves or fit the vision of success I was building. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. People knew exactly who he was talking about. Chloe beamed, sitting up straighter. But Chloe is different, Mark continued, finding his arrogant stride. She has discipline. She fits the aesthetic of a successful man's wife. She is exactly what I need as I move into the upper echelons of the corporate world. He raised his glass, expecting cheers. Instead, Alexander Pierce stood up. The scrape of Alexander O's chair against the floor was loud in the quiet room. He didn't have a microphone, but he didn't need one. His voice was a booming baritone that commanded absolute obedience. A beautiful toast, Evans, Alexander said. The entire room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop to success and to discipline. Since we are discussing your corporate future, I think it is only appropriate that I propose a toast as well, as your new CEO. Mark froze, the glass halfway to his mouth. His face went entirely pale. Alexander picked up his champagne flute, turning to face the entire reception hall, but his eyes were locked on Mark, and the execution began. Alexander held his glass high, the crystal catching the light of the cheap chandeliers. He didn't look at the crowd, he looked straight down the center of the room, directly at Mark. I am a man who appreciates discipline, Mark, Alexander said, his voice echoing with lethal calm. When my firm acquired yours, I initiated a full forensic audit of the executive accounts. I wanted to see exactly how disciplined my new VPs were. What I found was fascinating. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. Mark looked like he was going to be physically sick. His face was the color of ash. It turns out, Alexander continued, taking a slow, predatory step away from our table, that your idea of discipline involves expensing personal golf club memberships, private dinners with your fiancé, and a rather substantial corporate retreat deposit that happens to exactly match the catering bill for this lovely, mediocre wedding. A collective gasp went up from the tables near the front. Chloe's mouth fell open and she whipped her head to look at Mark, her eyes wide with frantic panic. "Mark, what is he talking about?" Mark didn't answer her, he couldn't. He was staring at Alexander, his hands gripping the edge of the bridal table so hard his knuckles were white. "Mr. Pierce, please, not here. We can discuss this on Monday." "We won't be discussing anything on Monday, Evans," Alexander said smoothly. He lowered his glass. "Because effective immediately, you are terminated. Your corporate access has been revoked. Security is currently clearing out your office, and our legal department will be in touch on Monday morning regarding the $140,000 in embezzled corporate funds you owe Vanguard Luxuries." The room erupted. It was pure, unadulterated chaos. Marka's mother shrieked, dropping her glass onto the floor. The groomsmen started whispering furiously to each other, and then Mark broke. The arrogant, insecure man who had dumped me for a size 0 trophy wife crumbled. His hands started to shake violently. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, presumably his gift to Chloe, and his hands were shaking so badly that the box slipped from his fingers. He dropped the ring. It clattered against the hardwood floor, rolling under the table, completely forgotten. Chloe, the perfect aesthetic bride, didn't try to comfort him. She didn't stand by her man. The realization that she had just legally bound herself to an unemployed, disgraced man facing a massive corporate lawsuit hit her. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of absolute fury. "You told me you were rich," Chloe shrieked, slapping his arm. "You said you paid for this with your bonus. You idiot. We're ruined. I'm not paying for this wedding." Mark tried to grab her hands, tears actually welling in his eyes. "Chloe, babe. Please, I can fix Ita. Don't touch me," she screamed, shoving him away so hard he stumbled backward into the wedding cake table, sending a tier of cheap vanilla frosting sliding onto the floor. It was a massacre. And I had the best seat in the house. I sat there in my $150,000 custom ruby red couture gown, my curves proudly on display, watching the man who told me I was too fat for success lose his job, his wealth, and his dignity in front of 200 people. I didn't feel sad for him. I didn't feel pity. I felt the pure, intoxicating rush of absolute victory. Alexander turned back to me, offering his hand. "I believe we've outstayed our welcome, darling. Shall we?" I looked at Mark one last time. He was on his knees, trying to pick up the dropped ring box while his new wife screamed at him over the noise of the horrified guests. He looked up, meeting my eyes through the chaos. The sheer regret, the crushing humiliation in his gaze was everything I had ever wanted. I smiled, a slow, victorious, lethal smile. I placed my hand in Alexandra's. "Let's go," I said softly. We turned and walked out of the reception hall. The heavy silk train of my dress swept across the floor, demanding space, commanding attention, and leaving them all in the dust. I didn't look back. When we got back into the Phantom, the heavy doors sealed us off from the chaos inside, the engine purred to life, and the car pulled away into the night. I leaned back against the plush leather, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a year. Alexander looked at me, the streetlights casting shadows over his sharp jawline. He reached out, his hands sliding behind my neck, his fingers tangling in my dark hair. "You were magnificent," he murmured, his voice rough and low. "I told you," I whispered back, my heart pounding against my ribs. "I don't fit in narrow spaces." He didn't say anything else. He just pulled me to him, his mouth crashing down on mine in a kiss that was as dominant, powerful, and unapologetic as the dress I was wearing. Mark had wanted a woman who took up no space, but Alexander, he wanted all of me, and he was going to get it. Upbeat, dark pop outro music begins to play. Have you ever had an ex try to make you feel small just to inflate their own fragile ego? They want you to hide your curves, shrink your presence, and apologize for existing. But ladies never forget. The space you take up is exactly the space you deserve to own. If Mark's public downfall and Isabella's ruby red revenge made your day, hit that like button right now. And if you want more stories of toxic exes getting exactly what they deserve and powerful women weaponizing their curves to ruin their enemies, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Tell me in the comments below, what color would your revenge dress be? Until next time, keep your heels high, your standards higher, and never apologize for your size. See you in the next video.